FCF. It's question and answer Friday, but it's actually not Friday. We had a technical glitch. We recorded everything, but we had no audio. So you're getting these questions and answers today. Okay. Janet,
yes,
with that?
Here we go. Our first question is, Ezekiel 43:10, Son of man, describe the temple to the people of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their sins. Let them consider its perfection. If they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangement, its exits, its entrances, its whole design, and all its regulations and laws. Why does showing this to Israel make them ashamed?
Okay, you have to know the historical context of the book of Ezekiel. When Ezekiel is written, the Israelites are in captivity in Babylon. Jeremiah had for over 40 years warned them that if they didn't return to God, stop their idol worship, that God would allow the Babylonians to come and overrun them. They did not listen to Jeremiah for 40 years. And so 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar came, destroyed the temple, burned it to the ground, just as Jeremiah predicted, took the Israelites into captivity back to Babylon and other Babylonian nations. They stayed there for 70 years. God gave Jeremiah a specific time frame, and then after the 70 years under Cyrus, they returned to their land and ultimately rebuilt their temple. So the reason that seeing this temple in this vision of Ezekiel's was going to cause the Israelites to be ashamed, this is the glorious millennial temple that will be built when Christ himself returns. It's much bigger, it's much more spectacular than even Solomon's temple, and his was spectacular. And so the Israelites will see what could have been, what should have been, but they refuse to listen to God's pleadings with them for over 40 years. Actually, it goes beyond 40 years. So that's why this would have been a shame. Again, when you get to the book of Ezekiel, they are already in the Babylonian captivity.
Okay. Our next question is, I have a family member who has recently identified themselves as transgender. In what ways may I have positive impact on them without giving up my beliefs in the name of tolerance? Loving this family member could be hard to express when the perception of love is support of their decision. This is also important to me because I have a young daughter who I would not like to get the wrong impression of gender. Thanks.
This is one of those very complicated situations that honestly I would rather handle in a personal phone call. You know, if we were, not in COVID, it'd be face to face even, but I'll try to give you, based on the information, the best that I can. It sounds like it is a family member, so it's someone that you already have a significant relationship with. Now, it could be a distant family member, I don't know. So what I'm going to say, you can't just take it to the bank, because I don't know enough. I don't know how much right you have to speak into this person's life. I don't know the degree of intimacy you have with them. But my inclination is to have a personal talk with them and use it as a way to share Christ and the truth about God and the truth about life with them, and to say, hey, look, I want you to know, just between you and I love you. I'm always going to love you. You're my family. But this decision that you were pondering, I can't support it, and here's why. I know this is not God's will for you. I know that He made us male or female, and the way that He made us in birth is the way we're supposed to be. So you get into the conversation, say, this doesn't mean that God doesn't love you, that God's not for you. In fact, the proof that God is for you is He's using me, you could tell them, to plead with you not to do this to yourself. You could tell them they're going to feel better for a little while, but then they're going to feel worse forever. So it's complicated, and I'm throwing things out that I feel uncomfortable not knowing the circumstances more perfectly. Now, pertaining to your younger daughter, unfortunately, you are forced into the position that all parents are being forced into today. We are in a time when perversion has been jammed down our throats and legitimized by the media, by the school systems, and so unfortunately, parents have to be willing to have these difficult conversations with their very young children, because if we don't, the school system is, or somebody in the school system. So you must, like all Christian parents these days, have very early on talks with children to explain to them what I just essentially said, that God makes us as He intends, male or female. There are not 8 or 9 gender selections. We don't select our gender. God does that. Just the same as we didn't choose our eye color or what country we were going to be born in or what time in history, nor do we choose sex. So tragically, we are forced to have these conversations with our children way too early, but we must do it because the system, the public school system, the educational system, the hierarchy of the media are going to force these conversations into the kids' lives, if nothing else through their friends. So we as Christian parents need to get there first. I feel so uncomfortable giving you this answer. It needs to have a personal conversation so that I can understand better, but I hope that this gives you something to go on.
Okay, our next question is, I have heard your theory on God's weeks in dealing with the Israelites and how you believe his plan seems to still be in play now with the Gentiles and Christians. It was fascinating. Can you please explain again? And do you see the rapid succession of peace treaties of late between Israel and its neighbors as a prophecy? Peace, peace, then sudden destruction comes upon them.
Okay, so to start off with, we have two questions there. So let me address the first one. It's not a theory. These feasts, they're called Feasts of the Lord. They are listed in Leviticus chapter 23. God gave them to the new nation of Israel, his nation, and the Israelites practiced these feasts for nearly 1,500 years, never knowing what they really meant. They did it trusting God. God said do it. They did it, but they didn't know what they meant. None of the feasts made any sense until Jesus came. And then Jesus fulfilled the first four in his life, resurrection, and the giving of his Spirit to empower his church. So what we have are these spring feasts, and Jesus fulfilled them all. So now they made sense. The Passover, Jesus is the sacrificial lamb. The first fruits, he's in the grave, and then he rises from the grave. And then 50 days later, Pentecost, the giving of the Spirit to empower his church. On the exact days, mind you, the Israelites had been going through these festivals, the spring, and then one is a summer festival, for 1,500 years, not knowing what they meant. Jesus fulfilled them at the exact time. This is why we know, it's not a theory, we know Jesus will return to fulfill the rest of these feasts. They are all fall feasts. You have the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Though we don't know the exact day or exact hour, we do know Jesus will return during the fall feasts. Likely the Feast of Trumpets he will return, then the Day of Atonement where he adjusts his relationship with the nation of Israel. It talks about in Zechariah 1/3 of the Israelites turning to him in mourning and realizing he was their Messiah all along. And then the Feast of Tabernacles, when Jesus is back on earth, he starts rebuilding that temple that we talked about at the beginning of this talk today in Ezekiel, and reestablishing and bringing healing to the earth and so forth. So this is not theory. This is God laying out his plan to show that the Bible is the one and the only divine inspired book on the planet, the true revelation of the truth about God and life. 1,500 years in advance, God laid out his whole plan for the ages. Jesus will return in the fall feast and fulfill them just as he fulfilled the spring feast and the summer feast. So they are very important for us to understand. So with our calendar, we follow a solar calendar. The Jews followed a lunar calendar. So the Feast of Trumpets, for example, it happens in that September-October window. It's a little bit different each year, but each September, October, we should be watching for the return of Christ. Now, we do know there are many signs that have to come to pass before he returns. Nevertheless, it says, we're not in darkness that the day is going to overtake us like a thief in the night. We're children of the day, children of the light, which means we should know the Word of God because it is what gives us enlightenment to know this truth. Second question, the recent peace treaties, are they fulfilling the prophecy in 1 Thessalonians 4:5, where it says, when they are saying peace, peace, then comes sudden destruction on them like a woman entering into childbirth? Perhaps. It's a remarkable thing that suddenly United Arab Emirates makes peace. It's kind of a tranquility thing. It's not exactly peace, but it's a normalization of relationships with Israel, and then Bahrain follows. Now here's the exciting part. The word is from Trump that there's about 8 or 9 other Arabic nations that are waiting for the election outcome to do the same. And so if you suddenly had 10, 11 nations, Arabic bloc nations, making peace with Israel, that's very significant. Here's why. Daniel 9:27 talks about an agreement that will be in place, and it talks about an entity that will break the agreement. It says that he, the entity, in the midst of the week, in the midst of a 7-year period, will break the agreement that was made with many. So here's why it's important. There had to be an agreement in place with many before you can break it. So, to this point, Israel has only had an agreement with Egypt. When Anwar Sadat was alive, he was courageous and made peace with Israel. But the rest of the Arab bloc nations, not so much. Now, this is interesting for another reason. These are Sunni bloc nations, but the hostility is really with the Shiite nations, Iran. Right now, the reason that these Arab bloc nations, these Sunni nations, are making these deals with Israel is because they are so against the Shiite-led Iranians. The book of Daniel, once again, chapter 11, talks about a series of wars that are going to involve Islamic bloc nations all around Israel, and at times involving Israel in the last days, just prior to the return of Jesus. I think we're seeing these blocs form now. For example, Turkey and Iran are starting to partner up, which is a very weird alliance. So you have this King of the North concept with the in northern Islamic nations, even some of the ones that were in the old Soviet Union, like Turkmenistan and so forth. Then you've got the Eastern Bloc nations, which Iran represents. Then you've got the King of the South, the Egyptians, Sudanese, and so forth. So we're seeing these blocs that Daniel 11 talks about, Daniel 9 talks about, and so these are truly exciting occurrences, and there are things to watch. Having said that, there are still a number of concrete, powerful signs that need to take place before we know that, okay, we're into the countdown, so to speak.
Okay. Our next question is, please share your thoughts regarding Psalm 83. Do you think it is a future war? If so, do you think it will occur before or after Gog and Magog?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Psalm 83 talks about a 10-nation federation, and these are nations that are all closely on the border of Israel, attacking Israel, seeking to destroy Israel. So the question is it yet to happen, or has it happened? Well, truly, the 1967 war could have been, I'm not saying that it was, it could have been a fulfillment of that. If you know a little bit about that, these bordering nations, they all attacked Israel simultaneously, and Israel, of course, drove them back and ended up taking their capital, Jerusalem, in the process. Having said that, it's quite possible that the Psalm 83 war is yet future. I tend to think it is yet future. So then the question becomes, does it come before what this person said, the Gog and Magog war? And that's referring to Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, you have once again this Islamic bloc of nations led by Iran. Turkey is involved in it. The Sudanese are involved in it. There are other nations that storm down on Israel at a time when Israel is at rest and in a peaceful condition. Could be because they've made these agreements with other Arab bloc nations, and then suddenly this strike comes. So the question is, does the Psalm 83 war, which is nations that are closer to Israel, and that attack happened before the Ezekiel 38-39 Gog-Magog war? It's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell. I tend to think the Psalm 83 war will happen first, and here's why. Israel wins that war. They devastate their enemies that are all around their border, and that might be the key that allows them then to rebuild their temple and form stronger, blocks of peace, which is why Ezekiel 38 and 39, when that attack comes, they find the Israelites guard down. They find them at a state of peace. Can't give you, certainty on this, but that's my tendency to look for right now. But let's just keep our eyes open, because, if the Iranians, along with Turkey and Sudan and some other nations, attack Israel sooner, then we know Gog Magog, or Ezekiel 38-39, comes before Psalm 83. So.
Okay. Now the last thing we have is on Tuesday. We have some very big news to look out for.
Yes.
Yes. So this is Monday, and
Yes.
so tomorrow, look out on all social media and email some
Yes.
big news.
Yes, yeah, very significant news. And should I tell them or should I just keep them guessing?
Oh, I think we should keep them guessing, but at the
Okay.
same time, it's up to you.
All right. You'll be getting an email, and please do look into it, because it really is, as Janet said, some really big, really exciting news. And I want you, once you do receive it yourself, to be sure and tell everyone else that you know that attends FCF, in case they didn't get it, to spread the news to them too. So I'll leave it at that, keep you guessing. Hopefully that way you'll be sure to watch.